Hey guys, welcome back to Hyrule Park, where I am building a theme park based on The Legend of Zelda and Planet Coaster 2. In this video, we are starting a brand spanking new area in the park. I appreciate all of the suggestions that have come through recently on the last video in particular. Some great ideas for sure in there, and some that I will definitely try to implement at some point. In the end, I did go forward though with Zora's Domain for the next area in the park to tackle. Probably an obvious choice, I think, from what I've done so far and what needs to be done to make this a proper Legend of Zelda inspired theme park. But also, I have another area that I've made huge progress on. Maybe could even call it complete. I won't spoil what it is yet, but I think that it will be out in the next week or so, depending on some other things that are involved with this video and this area in particular. Some people may already know what it is. There is a clue out there somewhere. But yeah, I was super happy with how that part of the project came together, and even since that clue was put out into the world, I've made a lot of progress on it since then. So yeah, definitely excited to show that off in the next episode. But anyway, like I said, this episode we're starting on Zora's Domain, and really this is the first time I've completely gone outside of Ocarina of Time in terms of inspiration. I'm trying to think of, and I really don't know if I've taken any inspiration from Ocarina yet in this area. Granted, we're only at the entrance so far, so there's still a lot to go in Zora's Domain, obviously, but I feel like the entrance is a good barometer for how the rest of the area will go. And based on that, not much Ocarina. This is mostly inspired by my memory from and the vibes that I got while playing through both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. And I'm sure if you're following along with this series, you probably played at least one of those two games and are familiar with that iconic setting in Hyrule. So yeah, maybe hopefully this will spark some nostalgic memories for you guys too. Yeah, going this route sort of presented a challenge for me that I haven't had to deal much with recently in some of the builds that I've done, specifically like in the Lost Woods area, the Forest Temple, those builds. Those fancy Zoras and their fancy architecture have really stepped up the challenge so far in this area for me in kind of testing my skills in this game. Totally different process from the Lost Woods and even Goron City so far. Maybe a bit similar to Castletown and the Temple of Time builds, but even those fit a more kind of general type of building style than this one did. I had to get creative to find pieces that would fit in what I was looking for in this area and how I utilize different building techniques. A lot of the symmetry and rotation type deal with this area so far in terms of the building techniques that I did use that you'll obviously see coming up in this video, a lot of that, but I for sure am happy with the change of pace. At first I was a little nervous about a new direction in terms of building methods and style because I got really comfortable in that kind of Lost Woods vibe and in those techniques that I was using and that kind of style of building. But once I got some momentum, I started to really appreciate the newness of this area in terms of like what I've been working on to this point. This is definitely a new territory for me, like I said. And surprisingly, the pack I used the most, I was not expecting to go in this direction at all, but I ended up using a ton of the sorcery pack pieces. I didn't think that I would go so heavy with like the stone material in this build and this area in general, but I think it fits the vibe that I'm going for, and layering that in with some of the marble pieces seemed to work. You guys can let me know though what you think. Did I make the right choice here with the sorcery pack as kind of like the go-to piece set for this build? And please say that I did make the right choice, because this took a lot of work to get this entrance built and I don't want to go back and redo it. So please just say it looks good. So specifically speaking with the different like intricacies involved in some of the parts of this build, I find that Zora's Domain has a lot of interesting sort of like curvature type pieces involved, which I found is sort of limiting when it comes to Planet Coaster building and simulating that sort of thing. I know it can be done, I've seen it done, but it's hard to accomplish and make it look clean in the end. So doing the best that I could. I didn't want to have anything with too many like hard angles to it. Lots of rounded pieces, archways, curved corners, that sort of thing. And of course you'll see by the end of this episode a lot of water in waterfalls. Obviously it's Zora's Domain to kind of dress up the area and create that Zora immersion effect. And I think another factor in making this a bit more of like an intricate build was the source material. Again, not going off of Ocarina with this one at all, but instead going with the newest generation of Zelda games, meaning the most up-to-date detailed graphics and visuals for a Zelda game. So that'll inherently sort of present more challenges, right, for using that as like the inspiration in a game like this where you have to build everything piece by piece for the most part. It's not like going off of Ocarina, which everything was like polygons and squares and hard edges and not super detailed because the system couldn't handle it back then. But you know, with these new games, obviously there's a lot of detail in there to kind of take into account, and a lot more intricate structures that are, you know, there for reference when I'm kind of thinking about this. So, and a lot of times the piece that you're looking for specifically when you get to a certain point in a build is not a piece that even exists in the game. Like for instance, there's this lamppost that I try to create in this area a bit later, straight from Tears of the Kingdom, you know, a reference to that game. And it sort of has like this fanned leaf-like element to it, but we don't have individual leaves for that in the game. So I had to use like the hawk eagle wing piece that I used for Kapora Gibora in the one of the Lost Woods Forest Temple episodes. I had to use that wing piece to simulate the look. And things like that is what takes a lot of time and a lot of patience in this game, finding how to manipulate things that aren't necessarily meant for what you're trying to get them to be. It's a big puzzle, and I love it. I guess this is a good time to call out that things will change that aren't necessarily shown in full detail all the time in this time lapse. The entrance sign, and seeing that there just reminded me of that. That was just a placeholder to see if a sign on top of the entrance gate would look okay or passable in any way, but I really hated it being there. So yeah, I did remove that, and I have another idea for the area sign that will hopefully come across as more of a like signature logo type sign rather than just a generic sign like the one on screen at this point. Another thing that I don't show a ton of in this episode is the experimentation with the colors of this area too. I'm still not totally sold on the blue tones that I chose, although I do like the darker direction of the blue more so than the lighter tone. So that will probably stick, but I may or may not tinker a bit with some of those colors off screen as we build this whole area out in its entirety. So you might see those change from time to time, but I'm not going to show myself going through the palette and figuring out a good blue to use. I don't think that would be entertaining for most people. One thing I really am happy with though early in this build is the nighttime lighting. That blue I think I nailed in terms of hitting that. I say that humbly, of course. I think I nailed the Zora vibes from Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. I wanted to make sure, you know, I had hit on those crystal-like figures on top of certain structures and light posts that are seen throughout Zora's Domain in those games. I have a couple versions of these that I'll end up using throughout the area. Like the one here, it's just like a cluster of 3 of the crystal pieces that kind of get the job done. And then later I'll alternate between that and I came across this bottle piece as I was looking for other pieces in the library, so I came across that and I end up flipping that upside down, and it really gets the job done too. So I'll probably alternate between those two for that effect. Alright, this main bridge into Zora's Domain I messed around and experimented a lot with during this build, and this is one of the things in terms of experimentation that I did keep in there. But yeah, it's another one of those things that I wanted to hit on the Zora architecture style, but I just couldn't quite get a good handle on all of the curvatures that I'd want to utilize with the pieces that we have in game. This beginning is for sure not the final product, but back to the experimentation thing. I've had a few of you guys mention in past videos that you enjoy seeing some of the trial and error and experimentation parts of these time lapses. So whereas some of the tedious things I'm not going to show, things like this, I think it's good to keep in, and you can kind of see where I started and where I end up. You know, I think it's kind of important to see that process. Maybe not important, but interesting is probably a better word. I don't know, you let me know, but I think it was interesting to kind of see. It's not anything crazy in terms of the differences that were apparent from the first go and the last go, but yeah, I think it's a cool process, and it kind of shows where I started, where I ended up, how things came to be. And then this is also where you'll notice that I really lean into the whole waterfall effect thing. Maybe too much, but I don't know. I feel like any Zora inspired area should have a ton of waterfalls. It adds a lot of like energy to the whole area too, and things aren't just like super static. That's a good band name. And some of the waterfalls are sort of like a repetition type of deal to kind of create that sort of signature element to this area for guests to recognize as they walk through. And others are more naturally integrated, or they will become more naturally integrated with the surrounding environment as we go along with Zora's Domain. But ultimately, yeah, lots of waterfalls throughout. It's supposed to give the effect that this area in general is supposed to give the effect that this whole domain is really created with the water in mind, if not created by the water, sort of. So hoping to hit on that with this whole area. And like I mentioned earlier, the entrance is really a barometer for the rest of the area. So I kind of had to set that vibe up nicely here with this entrance gate and set the expectation that this is a water focused area. That being said, I am still leaning towards no water park in keeping with the general theme park idea for Zora's Domain. Even though this whole entrance and the detail that I put into it almost feels like it should be set aside for sort of like a water park side of this theme park. And I feel like I'm already talking myself out of not going with the water park thing, and I'm going back and forth in real time. But I don't know, you guys, I'm incredibly torn with this. I want to do a water park. I just, like I said in the past, I still haven't used those features in this game. So if I did go the direction of a water park for this, we'd probably have to put this area specifically on hold for a bit while I'm able to kind of experiment with some of the water park features in game, which I'm not opposed to. But yeah, I guess if enough people feel strongly either way, I can side that way. But as of now, let's just assume I'm going to keep going with the general theme park idea for Zora's Domain and keep it like the other areas in Hyrule Park. Maybe you noticed in the background to this area footprint, which obviously is not going to just remain this dirt terrain in the end. I more just needed to visualize the space I was going to use for this area. That's why it's all dirt, just to kind of separate it. But also I added a sort of like marker in the background there towards that mountain cliff type spot. I wanted to make sure that I had everything more or less centered up with that landmark placeholder, because eventually my plan is to create like a big waterfall centerpiece to sort of anchor everything in the area. So yeah, that's why I have that random narrow wall of gray nothingness in the background. It's just so I can keep referencing that when I'm building the gate to keep things kind of centered more or less. And speaking of alignment, here's where things get a little bit wonky during this build. Like I said at the start, I used a lot of this sort of symmetry and rotate technique to create the circular walls and fencing that I wanted to incorporate. The problem with some of it though, not this in particular, because using this technique pretty much guarantees you'll be in a perfect curve or circle, whatever you're looking for. But at some point with this, I start to add some ornate pillars around, and I somehow was off by a hair in terms of like really centering the piece with the wall. And the fact that I use that piece as sort of like the reference to copy that pillar that I created and drag to different spots. The fact that it was off by a hair kind of made everything off by a hair, unfortunately. And my OCD usually allows me to focus in on that and make sure that doesn't happen, but at some point I realized I did not fully align or center the piece up with the rest of the gate. So yeah, there's some tweaking I have to do, tedious stuff to get it at least very close to being perfectly aligned. But yeah, if you're like me and things like that throw you off, I apologize. I do try to fix it in the end. And it's more or less unnoticeable unless you really know it's there, which I guess now everyone does because I told you. This is also where I start to go on a whim with things. Up until this point, I had some sort of visualization in my head and a plan for how to start it. But like most builds, I hit the point where it's kind of the end of the plan and I haven't planned ahead yet. And instead of taking my time with this and taking a step back and planning out next steps, I just decided to kind of carry with the momentum and see what I came up with. So yeah, I think both strategies are good in different ways. Like sometimes thinking too much and planning ahead too much makes it sort of robotic, and you don't get the same results as if you just sort of allow the creative momentum to carry the next elements out. So yeah, that's what I did with this, just kind of let my momentum carry the build for a little bit. I did decide though that I really wanted this whole area to have like different elevation levels, with the furthest back part of the area being the highest point, and then everything will sort of consolidate around a centralized either river or a big lake or both, that type of body of water with, again, like waterfalls sort of establishing the border of each terrace area. So that's kind of the general idea that I was going with and going off of with this. And then instead of having to terraform and get the water level perfect for what I was trying to do, which is super difficult to do with a terraforming water tool, so I decided to instead use these water pieces, which can really come in clutch for more detailed and kind of precise water features you're trying to build. So again, making sort of a terraced breakdown of the entire entrance, creating the terrain hierarchy effect and making the whole layout a bit more interesting than keeping things just on a flat plane, you know? I think it also plays into that idea that I was referencing earlier, the whole plan to make this appear as if the area was built and developed in and around the natural water that flows through it. And this is the main culprit, by the way, for the out of alignment thing I was just talking about. What I was going for here, there's like a lot of fins and fish sort of decorative elements around Zora's Domain and in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. But again, like I was referencing earlier, we don't have certain pieces, and we don't really have a fish piece, with, you know, the exception of there's like one statue fountain edition available in the library, but I didn't really want to use that one. It didn't really fit. So I didn't know if I could sort of replicate the vibe of that fish element. Instead, I had this idea for a Zora-esque type centerpiece. And I actually do like how it came out, and it kind of sets the tone for the whole vibe that the Zoras give off, at least in my mind. And this centerpiece kind of became like the tone setter for everything else going forward too. Not just, you know, in this episode, but for the remainder of this area as I go forward with it. Once I committed to this kind of like the shape and the details involved, and even some of the pieces involved, I sort of have like a jumping off point now for future builds. I think, you know, I'd like to continue to play off this vibe here. And I wasn't trying to make it more complex just for the sake of complexity. I was more just trying to make it feel intentional, because I think there's a difference between something being detailed just for the sake of being detailed and something feeling intentionally designed, which is my hope with this creation here. But we will see how it kind of turns out and plays into the other parts of this area. And once this felt locked in, at least enough for me to move on from it for the time being, that's when I could kind of turn my attention to that main bridge that brings you into Zora's Domain. That, you know, I started to iterate on that bridge. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of changes that go to it, a lot of little changes. Biggest thing for me was that I really wanted to have more of like an open feel to it. The marble and stone wall elements that I originally had here just made it feel too closed in and almost claustrophobic. So I wanted to add those glass panels in there so that, you know, one, it would allow for a less obstructed view to the water you're walking over, and then two, kind of maintaining some realism in terms of what a theme park would have to do for like safety measures, so that, you know, little kids didn't just decide to walk out into the water. I know my kids for sure would attempt to do that with no fence being there. So part of keeping it grounded in some sort of theme park realism. And you're seeing now what I thought was the most tedious part of this build. The stairs and then the two mirroring ramps going up to that higher level. The stairs weren't so bad, but the railings and getting those lined up to the ramps, specifically in the curving of those ramps and the incline of those ramps, that was a pain in the bum. But it was worth the headache, I think, to get it all kind of lined up properly, because I really like how it ended up. And again, the use of the arches there and that sort of thing, playing off the whole architectural style of the Zora, very much an intentional choice there, having the water flowing through the structures, not just around it, you know. But this is what I was referring to with the tedious steps, like for each individual piece having to line it up so it more or less matches the curve of the path, and it's also angled in the right way so that's all going up the same angle with the path, more or less. And I'm not the greatest at the path tool, even at this point of my playing the game, so the elevation rise and the exact curves of those paths are not identical, so I had to do this for both sides of each path, so 4 times lining these things up, then lining up the balusters, and listen to me whine about this. But it was tedious. And it's kind of one of those moments where I question every decision that led me to individually placing the railing pieces instead of just accepting something simpler, like using the, I don't know, auto fencing tool that is an option when building paths. But yeah, that wouldn't do. I needed to make this custom and fit what I was doing with everything else. Anything else would have felt kind of lazy to me, I think. But in theory, this shouldn't be that complicated. It's just a ramp with railings. But when you're trying to match the curve, match the incline, and keep everything sort of mirrored on both sides, it turns into this tiny kind of like math problem over and over again. You know, rotate a little, raise it a touch, check the angle, zoom it out, realize it's off, undo it, do it again. And because the paths aren't perfectly identical, like I said, even though they look somewhat identical, you can't just copy and paste the solution from one side to the other. I basically had to rebuild the logic 4 separate times, which is mildly infuriating, but also sort of satisfying once it all finally locked into place. And I think that repetition actually started to kind of reveal something about this area, like the curves, the arches, the way everything sort of wraps instead of angles. It started to feel less like I'm placing railings and more like I'm establishing like a visual kind of language for the whole domain. And once that clicked, I realized I could take that same circular idea and started to scale it up into like the main buildings that'll be scattered throughout this area of the park. So once the ramps and railings were locked in, I basically took that same circular logic that I've been not only just using on the ramps and whatnot, but throughout this whole area so far, and start kind of scaling it outward. Like I said, you'll see here I'm leaning really heavily into the rounded walls again. Not a lot of hard 90-degree turns or any hard 90-degree turns. Everything sort of wraps in on itself. It curves into itself. And I think that's what sort of makes Zora architecture feel so distinct compared to other areas in this park. Like Goron City is carved, Lost Woods is grown or overgrown, Castletown is structured and almost like more homey, sort of. But this feels more like composed, intentional, and almost intentionally like ceremonial in a way. Like even the arches aren't just structural, they're decorative. They frame space, they kind of elevate things in your mind. They make the walkways that you're walking across feel important. So like maybe I'm getting too deep here with a fictional civilization from a video game, but Zora architecture doesn't feel like scrappy or improvised. It feels more refined, and it feels like it belongs to a civilization that values detail and symmetry and presentation. So trying to get that across in this build. And actually, if you guys could humor me here for a minute. Something that keeps popping in my head as I reference Zora's Domain from different Zelda games and the vibes I get from them as I'm building this area out. Has anyone read or is in the midst of reading the Red Rising series? Because the Zora for me remind me so much of the golds in that book. Like think about it. The Zora are tall, they're elegant, almost genetically designed to look sort of regal. Their entire city is pristine and elevated above everything else around it in Hyrule. Water literally flows through the architecture like it's part of the design, not just like an environmental feature. Again, am I going too deep into this? Probably, but this book series, if you haven't read it yet, you need to if you're into fantasy in any way, shape, or form. Like I've never been much of a reader really at all throughout my life, like as a kid or as an adult. But over the last year, I decided to make a point to get into reading as a hobby. And like a month ago, I started the Red Rising series, and this one has turned me into a full-fledged like book nerd. Like I'm super into it. I'm on the fourth book now, and I just can't stop. It's so incredibly captivating, sort of like Zelda has always been kind of captivating for me with the world building in all of those games. But yeah, I don't know why my brain is doing this, but every time I jump into the game to build out this part of the park, Zora's Domain, my mind immediately jumps into Red Rising world. Like the comparisons are there for sure. Like, hear me out. Like the golds in Red Rising, which maybe I should back up for anyone who's not familiar to kind of explain what this is. But Red Rising, it's a sci-fi series that involves humanity far, far into the future. They've developed a sort of like caste system, and the golds are on top of that system. So I won't get into anything further in terms of like the story and where it goes, because I'd hate to spoil it for anyone reading or wanting to read it, but that's the premise behind the world building. But anyways, the golds in that are just basically engineered to be like superior physically, socially, all of that sort of thing. The cities they build are huge and massive and pristine, and almost seems like it's built to intimidate. And when I think about Zora's Domain, it sort of has that same energy about it. Like everything seems so elegant and elevated from the rest of the surrounding world of Hyrule. And, you know, maybe that's why this area has been so much harder to build than like the Lost Woods or Goron City. The elegance that I'm like trying to replicate is unforgiving, you know? Like if I'm building in the Lost Woods and something is slightly crooked or off, that almost helps the aesthetic. It adds to the chaos and it feels organic, you know? But here, if an arch or a pillar is off by even like a little bit, if the symmetry breaks in any way, if the color schemes are off, everything sort of feels off together, you know? I think refinement exposes flaws, and the aspiration for being perfect and elevated exposes more traits that don't fit that bill. Why am I getting so deep right now? I have no idea, but it sort of mirrors real life a bit. When something is like meant to be messy, you can hide inside that almost. Or like playing guitar, for instance, you add distortion to your playing, you can hide your imperfections. It's meant to be at least a little bit muddy, so it inherently hides like little mistakes to an extent, you know? But you pick up an acoustic guitar and you try to play the same thing, those imperfections are going to stand out because you're meant to be more refined on the acoustic guitar, and there's less to hide the mistakes. So, and again, this is all very wild for me to be discussing over myself building a fictional water kingdom inside a theme park simulator. But yeah, man, Red Rising, it's something else. It has absolutely hijacked my brain, clearly, and I get sucked into that world when I'm reading. Like I'm staying up way too late at night reading just one more chapter, I tell myself, and eventually I'm falling asleep with the book falling onto my face. Yeah, I sort of realize I have that same sort of pull in this game too. Like I finish a part of a build and I just need to do that one more step, and it spirals to me being awake still at like 1 a.m. knowing that my 3 kids are gonna be waking me up in 5 hours or less. Anyways, that's it for this too deep of a dive into Red Rising and comparing it to Zelda. I just wanted to get that out there off my chest because it's something I keep thinking about. But yeah, seriously, if Zora were in the Red Rising universe, they for sure be gold. If you're reading Red Rising or have read it, you get it, right? I'm not crazy. And if you're not, I apologize for the tangent, but also, if you're not, pick up the book. You will not regret it, I promise. Like everyone I've recommended it to so far has echoed the sentiment. They keep getting sucked in. They can't stop reading it. Yeah, do it. Do it. All right, back to the build, guys. Sorry about that. But yeah, this is that lamppost that I was referring to way back at the start of this video, by the way, trying to replicate this lamppost here from Tears of the Kingdom. I got as close as possible, but yeah, this is another example of having to use pieces that you would never even think to use for like a lamppost in this case. Like I'm using a bird's wing piece and an aquatic rock piece combined together to create like a Zora themed lamppost. It's so random. But yeah, there's a lot of examples of that throughout this game where you can really make what you want if you really look for the pieces to fit. You can probably see here I have a line of other potential fits, or what I thought to be potential fits for this piece. Those are laying out on the path behind. And yeah, those were test pieces, but couldn't get the job done with those, it turned out, so I had to pivot to this to get it to look as close as possible. But yeah, spending the time to peruse the piece library can really open your eyes to what you can potentially build in this game. So definitely take the time to do it if you're into it. The last step to really tie this area together for me was to figure out how the guest path was going to continue up and into the main part of Zora's Domain, because you know I can build the best buildings ever seen, but if the paths don't make sense or allow for the immersion, I feel it won't make much of a difference. I mean, maybe it would. The best buildings ever seen is a pretty high bar and would help the lack of pathing sense, but I am not building the best buildings ever seen, so I do need to allow the path to make sense and present the area in a way that is meant to be seen. So that's kind of the last step for me here in terms of like logistically finishing this part of the project. So I really wanted to have a lookout point at this section of the back part of the entrance. So above that centerpiece structure from the first half of the build, I thought it would be cool to have this here because where it's placed, you'll be looking out over the water and back into the center of the theme park where, you know, you should be able to see Hyrule Castle, Death Mountain, the Temple of Time, and that other section of the park that I've built up and that I hinted at starting off the video that I'm still not gonna give away just yet. But yeah, I thought this would be more of a cool like lookout area or scenic spot for family photos if this was a real theme park. Yeah, and it's starting to get towards the end of this section of Zora's Domain, this entrance build. You'll see that I added in the waterfall, or the start of the main waterfall in the background that I hinted at earlier. We'll get more detail into that in upcoming videos and probably have some sort of ride interaction, I would think. If I had to summarize like what this Zora entrance is supposed to be, you know, particularly from this project and what I have in mind for it, I really want it to set up a completely different vibe than we've seen so far with the other couple areas that we have. So again, architecture shaped by water, elegance, intention behind the structure, symmetry and curvatures, doing the heavy lifting instead of like making things huge scale, which I guess I did make some of the natural parts huge scale, but in terms of like the structures, not so much. And it's maybe not the most polished entrance just yet, but I think we're getting there, and I think it's a good jumping off point for this area for sure. So again, I really haven't locked in what Zora's Domain ultimately becomes after this entrance for this park, and I genuinely mean that. Like, I don't have a master blueprint sitting off to the side with every ride place and every pathway mapped out. Like, I know the tone, I know the vibe I want, I know the architectural direction and language that I want, but in terms of the overall direction of the area, I'm still very open, and that's kind of exciting because this area, more than any other so far, has this sort of like proverbial fork in the road sitting right in front of it. Like, do I lean fully into the traditional theme park format like the other areas of the park, you know, dark ride, coaster, flat rides, restaurants, that sort of thing, or do I sort of water parkify it, if you will? And I keep going back and forth on that. Like, you You probably noticed because I've already gone back and forth a couple times in this episode on it. Like, on one hand, Zora's Domain almost demands water interaction. It feels like it wants kinetic energy everywhere, slides, rapids, splash zones, something that makes the water aspect of this area feel alive and not just decorative. But then on the other hand, the rest of the park right now is structured like a traditional theme park, and I love the cohesion that kind of goes along with that. So if I suddenly carve out a water park, does that feel intentional, or does that feel forced? Or does it feel like I just got distracted by waterfalls, you know? And I honestly don't know the answer yet, so part of me thinks it would be really cool to experiment with the water park tools in this game, because I have not really touched them, like I've said. And that's usually how I grow in this game, is just forcing myself into a technique I'm not comfortable with. So there's that, like the curved ramps in this episode, that wasn't comfortable. The symmetry heavy circular walls, not my natural instinct in terms of building, and it ended up being, you know, one of my favorite builds of the park so far. So maybe leaning into a water park mechanics area is the next evolution of how I build in this game, or maybe it's a disaster and we pivot back to general theme park land. But yeah, it's kind of fun to kind of have it up in the air, and this is where I would love some feedback from you guys. Like, legitimately, you guys have been really cool with the comments. I appreciate all of the thoughts and compliments coming through. Yeah, if you feel strongly one way or the other, let me know. Let me know your ideas of how to kind of tackle this issue that I've come across. Water park or no water park, let me know, because, you know, this is one of those areas where I really want to let the comments and opinions kind of sway the direction that I go, because, like I said, I'm just torn. You know, I usually have a pretty clear picture of where I want to go with these things, and here I absolutely do not, and I think that's fine. I just need some assistance here. So yeah, and sometimes a collaborative approach is more fun too. So, and that ties into something else I tested the other night. I randomly decided to just go live. Didn't have a mic, didn't have a camera, there's no like production, no, just me building. And I saw a handful of people show up, and that was kind of cool. It was just a chill kind of build session, watching things come together in real time, no editing, no time compression, speeding up, just the actual process. And I know that wouldn't be for everyone, but it made me think, if we're at a crossroads like this with Zora's Domain, maybe that's kind of the perfect thing to figure out live together, if people would be open to that or interested. You know, like open up the water park tools, experiment, try things, break things, fix things. And, you know, if some of you are more experienced with these tools than I am, which if you play the game and use them at all, then you're automatically more experienced than I am. So yeah, maybe it would be cool for you to hop in and give some suggestions in real time. That could be kind of a fun way to approach this area. Less of a watch me build this final product and more of a help me shape the direction of this area. I've never really done that before, so it could be fun. I don't know, it could be a terrible idea too. But yeah, if you've made it this far into the video, first of all, thank you so much. I appreciate you. You are a legend. This is a long video to watch me curve ramps and create fictional fish architecture that is not casual viewing, so I appreciate you. So if you're enjoying this world coming together piece by piece, land by land, please hit the like button. Genuinely would appreciate that, and it would help me reach other Zelda nerds out there who might want to see Hyrule turned into a real park layout. So, and if you're not subscribed yet, we are literally building a kingdom together, so please, you might as well stick around to see how ridiculous we can get. And as for the other area that I hinted earlier, you may already know there was a clue, a subtle one. If you happen to be around during that live stream test, you may have seen something taking shape. I'm not confirming anything, but I'm also not denying anything. But for now, Zora's Domain has its foundation, it has its tone, it's ready to go, and whether it becomes a refined theme park area or it evolves into something more aquatic and water parkified, I'm excited about where it could go. So let me know your thoughts. Water park, traditional attractions, hybrid, and maybe I'll see you in a live stream soon. Anyways, guys, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for the cinematic shots, and I will see you probably in a week with the next episode. Later. you.